So, Jay,
Yes.
this book is about a reincarnated St. Patrick.
Yes.
How many snakes are in the book?
Tons. Because the snakes are have always been an allegory for the demons that St. Patrick cast out of Ireland. Because there's never been really snakes in Ireland, so it's always just been a big allusion to Patrick going into Ireland in his first life and literally exorcising the demons off the island. Which is interesting because if you look at the historical Patrick, he was working with druids, he was working with all these other people. Like, Ireland during his era was very diverse, very different. Like, they had access to, like, Egyptians coming over and everything. You know, he really was in kind of like this melting pot of religions at the time that people don't expect to be there.
No,
but
not at all.
But he had to deal with working with the Druids, working with the Saxons, working with Romans because he was originally captured and that he was originally born in Rome and then captured by pirates, put out in a field in Ireland where he found God, and then went back to Rome.
Damn it, I forgot where I left him. Obviously, it was a field in Ireland.
Exactly. But
Sorry, God.
yeah. But he had to deal in many ways with building an ecumenical organization. Because if you didn't have allies back then, if you were just some lowly Christian monk just showing up out of nowhere saying, you know, God is the only true God and Christ is his only son, you're going to get killed pretty quickly. So
Yeah,
he had to make a lot of friends.
Because, you know, the Irish back in the day
Yes.
were not just a bunch of flogging Molly loving drunkards.
No.
Because much to everyone's chagrin, there was no flogging Molly back then.
Right.
But they were badasses.
Yes.
And the Celtic society was very egalitarian.
Yes.
And very feminist.
Yes, exactly. And, you know, there's all these legends of him, and we know that these aren't, you know, these are apocryphal, but he was hanging out with St. Bridget, who was originally an Irish pagan goddess, who was later transferred over to become an actual Catholic saint.
Wait, are you telling me that Christianity stole an element of another religion and completely swallowed it and turned it into their own pale mockery of what it originally was?
Yes, John, yes I am. Yes, I am. And you can read all the mockery there is in The Blessed and Possessed by Falstaff Books.
Yeah, you know, you wrote a fair chunk of my stuff. And
Yeah.
so the fact that...
I think I should say it out loud, full shoot. I've always been a big fan of yours.
Well, thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. But it's pretty obvious that I'm working through some shit with
Yeah.
organized religion, especially in my earliest work.
Yes.
And this is kind of that for you. This is you working through some stuff with organized religion on
Yeah.
the page in this series.
Well, this book starts for me when I'm 7. Like, I know that's a crazy thing for people to hear, but I was living in St. Louis, Missouri. I was going to a Lutheran kindergarten.
Which is a lot like Catholic, only
Yeah.
with gay people, right?
Yeah. Yeah, the Lutherans are going to love to hear that. But every Wednesday we would go to convocation. And Pastor Wormley, who was both the head pastor and the principal of the school, kind of scared me one day. And it was the last time he ever really said this because my mom got him for it because it really affected me. But he tried to present this idea to kids that if you have any bad feelings inside of you, or if you have any rebellious thoughts or feelings, that's the devil in your heart. Well, when you're 7,
Yeah.
things are very literal.
I got that crap when I was a kid, too.
Yeah.
Rural South Carolina Presbyterian.
Yes.
And I got that of the whole thinking bad is the same
Yes.
as committing the sin.
Right.
So I was like, oh my God, I've thought all of these impure thoughts and now I'm going to hell.
Yeah.
That was before I realized that the house band in hell is going to be rockin'.
Oh, it's going to be the greatest festival of all time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, for me, these books wasn't just dealing with, like, I think all of us who have been in the Christian faith, people who are still in it, people who have left, I think that we all have this kind of deep unspoken trauma a little bit, and it's not necessarily because of Christianity or the beliefs or Christ.
No.
But there's so much that the institutions have done
Absolutely.
to people, especially children,
Yeah.
which is a huge thing for Patrick. So when the book opens, Patrick has quit the Vatican again because he's like, I was here before you fucks were actually doing anything. I had a wife, and now I can't even have a wife because of the Lateran Council. You're telling me I can't get married, I can't have sex, I can't have fun. And he's like, this is not the life that I lived the first time. And then you put on top of that all the scandals that have happened in the Catholic Church, especially the ones that dealt with children. For him, one of the primary things I think people sometimes forget about the New Testament, and specifically Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Christ is very clear about how you treat children. That all children belong to him, all children come to him, and out of everyone under God's purview, Christ protects kids. So when he sees things that are happening in the Catholic Church, he's immediately like, well, I can't stay here. I can't do this. Because obviously, it's a huge moral and ethical failing outside of the bounds of it just being sin. Like, for him, it's the institution for him is just done at this. And, you know, during the research of this, I spoke to a lot of actual Catholic exorcists, a lot of actual priests. There are a lot of people who are in the institution that I won't name names because I don't want to get them in trouble, but there are a lot of people in the institution who are priests and nuns who are looking at the institution who are kind of walking around like, how are we still doing this? Why are we still doing this?
Yeah.
Like, it's the wheels clearly fell off a long time ago, but now we've crashed the entire vehicle, and there's no putting it back together with duct tape.
No, there's not. You can't come back
Yes.
from a lot of the things that the church
Yes.
specifically has done. You can't come back. There's a lot of individual cases of individual clergy across all denominations doing awful things.
Well,
But when you look at a monolithic entity, some of the stuff that entity has done and allowed and covered up, you can't back up. You can't back that up. Because, again, you are kids. Now, here's a question for you.
yeah.
This is going to be the first book that you've released with us as a father.
Yeah.
This is your first new series
Yeah.
as a father.
Yes.
How did that color the story? Because you immediately leapt to, it's all about children.
Yeah.
That's not 10 years ago, Jay.
No. Originally, like, the books were going to address that anyway, because when I started writing these books, they were still in the midst of Cardinal Ratzinger, who's the former Pope Benedict, of course, coordinated a lot of switching priests around the parishes to cover up what was going on. There was a lot of real questions about, like, okay, how do we deal with the Red Shoe Devil, as I called him? When I finally had a kid, and I was going through, I mean, for this series, I've literally read 5 different versions of the Bible, each at least 12 times. And that's not including all the stuff I did in undergrad, because my background is in history and religious studies, and my focus in undergrad was the early Christ movements.
Which may make you the only person I know with more useless degrees than me.
Yeah,
as
probably.
As the publisher with an acting degree.
Right. But, you know, I think having a kid really hit home for me that Patrick's very concerned about people having the choice to exert their free will, to feel how they feel, to find their truth. And so much of the institution, especially towards children, has always been about kind of breaking them down and forcing them into this lane of thinking and worldview and thought that, frankly, I have to say, and this is my opinion, I'm sure some readers will agree with it, I'm sure there's going to be readers who disagree with it, but I think that Christ is very clear about making the world better for kids, because to him, we're all his children.
Right.
But the youngest have so much more to deal with, even back during the time of Christ's historical life, because we know there's a historical Christ.
Yeah.
But during
there are records. The man
Yes.
was convicted of
Yes.
a crime and executed
Yes.
by the government.
in the most horrid way possible.
Yeah.
Like that's another thing I do in my book that shows up in the second novel. We actually view the crucifixion of Christ, and like I'm very much blow by blow. This is what they actually did. Like crucifixion is one of the most horrific things you can do to another human being.
Watching something like that, even on stage, because I directed a play called Corpus Christi,
Yes.
which is Terrence McNally's blending of his upbringing as a gay kid in Texas
Right.
with the Christ mythos. And crucifying someone on stage,
Yeah.
you feel it.
Yes.
Every hit of the hammer, even when you know that this is make-believe.
Yeah.
If you've done your jobs right, people are sobbing in the audience.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to say that most of the time we did our job right. We had people just wrecked.
Oh yeah.
And seeing that level of barbarism
Yes.
is just amazing. It's the kind of stuff that you can't get away with that crap in horror movies.
Well, even today, our understanding of crucifixion is still sanitized,
Mm-hmm.
because there's one thing that we always leave out of it. You know, the thing about Christ, and I was actually on a political panel today online talking about this, because the former president was recently convicted for 34 felonies, and his friends are coming out of the woodwork to say he's like Christ in terms of his persecution. And like, he's not going to be flayed. Well, if you let me, he's not going to be flayed and flogged bloody. He's not going to be forced to carry his rack to a hill. He's not going to be tied down to that rack and have his limbs nailed to the wood. And he's not going to have, and this is the part that I find most churches honestly leave out, because this is the part where people don't get how brutal it is. They break your legs with a maul.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they hang you there, and it actually suffocates you.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you can't draw breath
Well-
when all of your weight is like that.
And I try to highlight that because I do not consider myself a Christian anymore, but I find a lot, and especially working on this series, a lot of value in Christ's message and his ministry. And
Yeah.
I think the real miracle is not necessarily even the resurrection. It's the fact that in the midst of literally the worst historical pain you can go through, he still finds a way to forgive his oppressors and forgives the people around him. Like, he has had the literal worst thing that you can have happen to you in the ancient world, and he's still willing to look down and be like, I forgive you, I forgive myself, and I'm sorry, and we will go forward from this. Like, that in itself is the miracle. It's not even the resurrection. It's the fact, in the midst of being harmed by the world, you can still look at the world and say, I understand, and I forgive you for it, and we can move forward from it. Like, it, especially in today's world, if you think about that, how we kind of hold to things so hard when things are done to us, like, it is...
Real or imagined.
Real or imagined. It is one of the most... Like, I don't like throwing the word grace out there, but
it is.
You have to have such a level of grace within you
Yeah.
to do that. That is almost inhuman and almost miraculous and definitely divine.
Yeah.
And in many cases, superhuman.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, to pivot,
Yeah.
talking about resurrection,
Yeah.
how the hell is Patrick back in the 21st century?
So, the interesting thing about Catholic saints is that Catholics believe that their saints reincarnate.
Okay.
You will find records going all the way back to before the Middle Ages, and especially during the Crusades, of Catholic saints reincarnating. Like, God will actually allow his saints to come back and minister again on earth. I mean, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but during the Crusades, during the First and Third Crusade, they believe that the same saint reincarnated twice.
Huh.
So Catholicism is very fascinating.
That's because the first crusade didn't work, so he had to reincarnate again. And
Yeah, had to show up and like, what are you guys doing?
come on, bruh.
But it's one of those things where, you said it beforehand, Christianity has taken a lot from other religions and other faiths and other belief practices. They have always held this idea that, like, and it kind of gets into, like, Indic religions, that God's saints are special. And God's saints are not just his healers and his prophets, they're also his soldiers. And those soldiers will come back. And it's a very fascinating thing. Like, the book started about as an examination of Catholic exorcism, because there's a very interesting thought within Catholicism about what exorcism is for. Many Catholics believe that exorcism is there to show God's mercy and God's benevolence, because God gives permission to all things. You can't just be a sinner and drink and fornicate and do drugs and a demon just shows up in you. God has to give permission for that. Which, in my research, if you think about that, in the real world, a exorcism in the Catholic Church can go anywhere from 5 months to 5 years to 10 years. Like, it's almost like going to therapy in a way. But if you think about it, like, these people go through 5 years of torture, of having things happen to them that are unexplainable. Coughing up nails, like, that is a real thing that happens, and then they do x-rays and sonograms of people, and they don't have nails in them. And it's one of those things where, if you stop and think for a moment, I think if you're a rational human being, and you hear that God permits all of this suffering just to show off how nice he is towards the end, I think that there's a very moral and ethical issue there that Patrick deals with directly.
Well, that's why I left the church.
Yeah.
I could not reconcile the concept of a being that is omnipotent, omniscient, all-loving.
Yes.
And the existence of hell.
Yeah. I love you, but I'm going to torture you to show you that I love you. Like, that doesn't seg.
There's a word for that kind of relationship.
Abuse.
Yeah,
exactly.
It is. I mean, look, there's plenty of people who find solace in religion. And I've said to my niece is a Presbyterian minister. Mm-hmm. And I've said to her many times that if there were more ministers like her,
yes,
I would probably still be Christian.
Mm-hmm.
But that idea that this being that has the power to do anything will choose to torment you,
yes,
for eternity, but this being also has infinite love, those things don't work.
Right.
If you love someone or something, you cannot torment them until the end of time.
Well, at the very base level of it, like, it means God is gaslighting people.
And it's crowd control.
Yes.
It's all crowd control. It's all human-created crowd control.
Well, getting back to my study of the early Christ movements, I argue, and I've always argued, that there is a very different Christ before Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, and the one that we get afterwards is not actually Christ. It's Constantine doing Christ cosplay.
Now, are we talking Alan Moore Swamp Thing Constantine, or are we talking early help?
Like early Roman Emperor Constantine.
Because I really liked the Garth Ennis Steve Dillon run on Constantine in the 90s.
I have to say, Constantine is such a huge influence on this. Like I was mentioning earlier at the Falstaff Roadshow, that, like, not only Keanu Reeves' Constantine, but, like, the comic book Constantine was very important in terms of the formation of the Patrick character.
Yeah.
That and Jesse from Preacher.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Preacher is a huge thing that I grew up...
Also Garth Ennis and Steve Dillon.
Yeah, but I've also always been, like, a big Clive Barker fan, and he's always walked that line. I argue that Clive Barker was urban fantasy before he was...
Some of his stuff.
Yeah.
Nightbreed's 100% urban fantasy.
Yes. Well, like, all the Harry D'Amour stuff,
mm-hmm.
like, that's an urban fantasy character.
Yeah.
That's pre-Harry Dresden, before Butcher.
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Anne Rice was urban fantasy.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But, I mean, she would never have admitted it.
No.
But that's okay. Margaret Atwood's also a science fiction writer, and she won't admit that, so whatever.
Right. Literary. But
speculative fiction.
Speculative, that's right.
Yeah. I'm sorry I can't write speculative fiction. I don't have an MFA.
Right.
I'm sorry, I just write weird shit.
No.
So Patrick comes back to save the world.
Yes.
And he's quit the Vatican at the top of the story.
Yes.
Where do we go? Is he now a freelance exorcist?
Patrick is bound by this idea that as much conflict he feels with God, he still feels beholden to the service, to actually go out there and do the work, to actually free people from torment and perdition. He regionally goes to New York because during his last exorcism, which takes place before the book, this demon kept saying, like, you have to go to New York. Something's happening in New York. She is the Word, and the Word is with her. You have to go to New York. Mm-hmm. And he decides, like, after he quits, like, well, I can either sit around and get high and get drunk, or I can go to New York and get high and get drunk while figuring this out.
As long as we can keep getting high and drunk still on the table, I'm in.
Yes. Well, like, the reason I put that in there, because I met a lot of real Catholic exorcists, and the stuff that they have dealt with throughout their careers leads to drinking, leads to drug use, leads to atheism. Like, a lot of people who have seen the supernatural stuff will still see the supernatural stuff and just go, like, fuck. And it's so hard for them to go through it. Like, one thing that I try to push in these books is that faith is labor. Like, you have to labor to have faith. It's not just something you have innately. And it's something you war with, and it's something you doubt, and it's something you have to constantly reconsider. Because Patrick has to keep going and asking himself, why am I doing this? Why am I helping these people? Why am I putting myself at risk when I know this might just be God trying to show off again? Like, do I want to be an agent to that? And ultimately he decides that the truth is important. Helping the last Nephilim left on Earth is important, who turns out to be the daughter of Lucifer, who we also see a POV from in the second book. And his POV is directly tied to why the last Nephilim is on Earth, is tied to Lucifer's fall and rebellion.
You know, I've always posited two things that piss off the Christians. Okay, I've posited a lot of things that piss off the Christians, but the two that I have always believed, and believe to this day, that drive Christians nuts. One, I believe that Lucifer is the holiest of angels.
Yes.
And I believe that Judas was the apostle who loved Christ the most.
Yes.
Because if you don't have a Judas, you don't have Christianity in 2024.
Correct.
Because if you follow the doctrine that I was taught as a child, one, there was a lot more rhyming. Because, again, rules.
Well, I grew up Presbyterian as well.
Yeah.
So,
but he was put on this earth to die.
Yes.
Someone had to be the catalyst to get him killed. And who are you going to ask to do the hardest thing possible?
Yeah.
The person who loves you the most.
Yes. And I actually believe that, because you have to investigate the character of Christ.
Yeah.
Like, if you truly believe that Christ is the embodiment of God, then he is working with a knowledge and foresight that you can't just deny and sit here like, oh, he didn't predict Judas, or he didn't see what would happen with Peter.
Of course he knew.
Like, and he's even saying it out loud, like, Peter's going to turn away from me.
Before the cock crows 3 times, before the cock crows, you will deny me 3 times.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, he knows all this is going to happen.
Yeah.
So it's hard to sit there and look at Judas and say, oh, Judas is this criminal.
I mean, he said it at the Last Supper.
Yeah.
He knew what was up. And without Lucifer falling, there's no point in Christ existing.
Well, exactly. And I thank you for saying that, because I really boil down Lucifer rebels against God, because his thinking is, I see all these things happening in your name, and I see all these things that you've created that are imperfect, and yet you're telling us that you are perfect, and we cannot answer questions about it. We cannot ask questions about this or receive clear answers about it. And in his rebellion, Christ, when God the Father substantiates into God the Son, which in the book is a very controversial moment for all the archangels, because our perfect daddy has turned into an imperfect child. What are we going to do about this?
Yeah.
And it really is, like, I wrote it to where Christ is responding to Lucifer. And the life of Christ is him trying to figure out what his son was saying and finally getting it.
I feel like there's a fair chunk of parallels there.
Yeah.
And I played around with this a good bit in the first 4 years of the Harker series. I mean, I went so far as to... I basically banished God and all the archangels.
Yeah.
And I had God go on walkabout.
Yeah.
Right after the War on Heaven.
Yeah.
And all the archangels all lost their mind and forgot who they were until we looped them all back around.
Mm-hmm. Great books, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I did something in the most recent Harker book that proved that God's not gone.
Yeah.
In Lost, they find a site that has been touched by God.
Yeah.
It's not an ancient site.
Right.
It's on Roanoke Island.
Right. Yeah.
And it's post-Revolutionary War.
Mm-hmm.
So there's this place, and that causes a huge crisis of conscience in Glory, the angelic character in the series, because she's like, I know this magical aura, I know this trace.
He's here.
He was here.
Yeah.
But he was here well after I thought he was gone.
Mm-hmm.
I also wrote God as a character in the 5th Harker book.
Yeah. I actually think it's really important that we write God as a literary character.
I mean, what if he was one of us?
Yeah, well...
Just a slob like one of us. Just a stranger on the bus trying to find his way home.
Exactly. Well, I also think that, like, we measure time in such a linear way that for God, time is probably not something that he would have to deal with. And even Christ is something that, like, he would look at very differently from us.
Yeah.
So, you know, the coming of the kingdom, the restoration of Christ to the earth, you know, for him, we expect it to come with, like, catastrophe and all these things. Why?
Yeah, for him it might just be Tuesday.
Yeah. And he
hopefully
might be
not next
to
Tuesday, because I want these books to come out first.
Right. Well, like, hopefully when he shows up, he's like, yeah, it's just Tuesday, but I picked this Tuesday to show up because I need to show up at some time.
Yeah.
Better late than never.
Right?
Yeah.
But, you know, you're right. If, again, it goes back to that omnipotent, omniscient, and surprised by a pissed off angel? No.
No.
You don't get that. Also, one of the things that a lot of writers have played with is that the War on Heaven was angels being pissed off because they didn't have free will.
Yes.
If you don't have free will, how do you pick a fight with the boss?
Well, I go back into the Bible and examine that, because one thing that happens with the origin of the Nephilim is that God's angels came down from earth, they fell in love with the children of men, they
fucked them.
They fucked them and bore Nephilim, which were the giants and heroes, as the Bible says of the ancient world. And then you have the book of Enosh, where God appoints Enosh to go and kill all the Nephilim.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I always thought that, like, that was such an interesting thing, the idea that these semi-perfect creatures, angels, would come down and look at us frail, imperfect humans and find us beautiful and find us worthy of, like, having children with, because the Bible's clear that, like, they love the children of men. They love humankind. This isn't this thing where they come down and pillage and rape. Like, they are forming relationships, and they are convincing these women and these men, because there's plenty of angels historically that are women. They're convincing humans to have babies with them and have lives. And one of the things that Lucifer does that causes his rebellion is that he falls in love with a woman in ancient Judea. He gets her pregnant, and he's like, no, we're going to have this kid. It's my kid, and I need to be there as a dad. And all the other archangels are like, but that's not what God said. And He's like, when did God say that? And then he even challenges God at one point in a pivotal scene where he's like, you are telling us that we have to act this way, but you keep doing these things, and all I want to do is be a dad. All I want to do is be with my wife. All I want to do is live a normal life. In many ways, like, angels want to be human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's been a central conceit to a lot of things. Preacher.
Yes.
It's something that it's something that Ennis touches on in Preacher quite a bit. Sandman has played with that. Gaiman in Sandman. And
Gaiman's been brilliant with it.
I think the last time Gaiman wasn't brilliant might have been frickin' Miracle Man. So
yeah. I thought Anansi Boys was a little bit of a copy of American Gods. Like, it's beat for beat almost American Gods.
I didn't love Anansi Boys.
Yeah.
Still would give my left nut to be able to write like Anansi Boys, not even
his prose. So I love Gaiman's novels. One of my favorite novels is Stardust because I think
I love them. I love the book.
It does so much examining fairy tales, but also keeping the fidelity to the fairy tale itself.
You know what it reminds me of?
What?
It reminds me of Star Child by James Artemis Owen.
Yes. Yeah.
Which I love. I have the big leather-bound compendium version.
Right.
I love me some Star Child. I also love James's art.
Mm-hmm.
His art is freaking incredible.
Yeah.
Gaiman, not so much with the art.
Yeah.
He's gotten a lot better.
Yes.
Because I remember when he used to do sketches in
really?
books. Yeah.
Yeah.
Way back in the day when he was Neil Gaiman who writes Sandman, not Neil Gaiman, the best fantasy author on the planet.
Controversial opinion. I honestly think he's a great novelist and a great short storyteller. One of the most brilliant comic book writers of all time.
Ever.
And can take characters that are in other people's sandboxes and make them new and fresh again. Like what he did with Batman and Alfred and Joker.
I'm sitting here trying to think if there's anyone I would even put on his level as a comic writer. And I love me some comic writers. I grew up on Chris Claremont. I was a big fan of Chris Claremont X-Men.
Yeah.
But
I think when we talk about, especially he did a lot of stuff with Vertigo and DC.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you look at Frank Miller, we always look at Frank Miller as one of those pivotal comic book voices, but I would argue that Gaiman has a better reach of humanity than Frank Miller does. Not that Frank Miller can't do it.
The one I would probably put closest to Gaiman might be Grant Morrison.
Yeah, Grant's great.
Because he definitely plays with the format.
Yeah.
And he does things to set things on their side.
Right.
And make you look at things from that 5 degrees off axis that Gaiman forced you to do.
He's also the last guy to actually, I think, nail Superman.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I haven't read that run. I've heard great things about it, but I haven't read it.
He understands it. He understands what Supes about.
Yeah.
Just like you kind of, like Superman, you have to understand what Christ is about to really nail that character.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, before we get done,
because
we've been yapping for a while and could go for quite a while longer. But
and this has been great. So thank you so much for doing this with me.
Happy to, brother. So, if I'm selling this book at a convention, which I will be in a matter of weeks, when someone walks up, what do you want me to tell them? If you like X.
If you like Constantine and Kevin Smith's Dogma mixed with high-octane urban fantasy, you're going to love these books.
All right, so early Anita Blake.
Yes.
Plus Dogma, plus Constantine.
Which, real quick, Dogma to me is one of my favorite films, and I think it's one of the most important films that was made during that era, and Smith doesn't get enough credit for how much he really examined faith and divinity.
Smith doesn't get enough credit as a filmmaker and a writer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Red State.
Yes.
Is Red State is not only an incredible movie, but Red State moved the way films are made.
Yep.
Because he shot that on a Red camera and a DSLR.
Yep.
He didn't have a big Panavision rig.
You and I can both speak to this because we've been traditionally published on the small end. We're both indie authors. Having that indie mindset and that indie work ethos and the problem solving of being an independent artist, he's the one who set the tone for a lot of us.
Absolutely.
Terms of, like, you may not have a lot, but whatever you have, use it to your fullest extent. Like, I watched Clerks last week. Still a brilliant film. If you stop and think about it.
I saw him give a keynote address at the National Association of Broadcasters conference right before Red State came out. So whatever year Red State was made, this was probably 6 months after it was in the can.
Right.
And the thing that he said for filmmakers, for broadcasters, and for writers, and for creatives of any type, the thing I took away from his speech was, stop surrounding yourself with people who tell you why you can't do something. Mm-hmm. Surround yourself with why not people.
Yes.
Anytime you come up with a stupid, crazy idea, they just say, why not?
Yeah.
And give it and try it. You know, this series was a big departure for you.
Yeah.
You had been doing African continent sword and sorcery style stuff, epic fantasy stuff. This was a big departure for you, and still tying to a lot of things that were thematically in your earlier work, and it thematically in your life.
And it also taught me so much about, like, this is the first book I've written in the first-person POV, and there's such an art to first-person POV that I don't think people appreciate, and I didn't appreciate until I had to start working on this. Because for a long time, I will admit I was an asshole about some things. I thought first-person POV is kind of easy because you can just talk out of your head. But actually embodying a character, embodying a voice. One thing that people at home, you've heard me talk about John before, but this dude's my mentor. One thing that you hit for me early on in my career was really work on voice.
Yeah.
Like, figure out who the characters' voices are.
Voice is everything.
Yes.
I mean, it's not...
And I didn't get it until this series.
Well, and
it made me a better writer. This series has made me such a better writer that I can go back to epic fantasy or sword and sorcery, or continue as I'm choosing to in urban, because I'm now in love with it.
And what, for me, writing in first person always felt natural because of my background in theater.
Right.
So embodying a character was my career before writing. So writing in third person has always felt a little bit like writing with handcuffs on.
Right.
Because I can't get deep enough. But as I've been working on Unforgiven, my most recent release, it's in third.
Yeah.
Because it's high fantasy, it's high adventure fantasy, which is typically third person.
Well, to plug another Falstaff book, you have Joseph Brassey's Skyfarer.
Absolutely.
And one of the quotes on the front of it is, I forget the full quote, but it ends with, like, this book has so much pathos.
Yeah. That's from Neil Stephenson.
Yeah. Writing in first person taught me how to insert pathos into third person.
Yes.
Because that is something in third person that is often lacking.
Yeah.
But, like, I learned so much. And one of the things that you taught me about, like, dialogue in the first person, like, you had me go back and read a lot of David Mamet.
Absolutely.
And, like, Mamet really helped me figure out that, like, dialogue has to be so much more natural than you think it should be. Because so many of us are really trying to replicate real life in our book, so we drop that suspension of disbelief.
And what we end up doing is we don't replicate real life because we replicate perfect real life.
Right.
And
we replicate TV and movies.
Yeah, and not even like Aaron Sorkin TV and movies, but like Michael Bay TV and movies.
Yes.
And Michael Bay is a lot of things, but a genius at dialogue crafting is not on the list.
No, not at all.
I tell newish writers all the time that the two people they need to read the fuck out of to learn how to write dialogue, Mamet and Sam Shepard.
Yeah.
Those are the two. Because Sam Shepard is that lyrical... There's a lyricism to Shepard's prose, but it's dirty.
Yes.
It's guttural lyricism.
May I add someone that I've
Of
really
course.
started reading in depth? Dashiell Hammett,
Mm-hmm.
like that old noir, you have to be crystalline clear, you have to be bullet sharp, and
Yeah.
everything has to be done with a razor's edge.
And you got to do it
there's
in
no
40,000 words.
Yes.
Or 35,000 words.
There's no waste.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Jay, thanks for doing this. This was a lot of fun.
Man, thank you so much.
So get out there, pick up all of the Patrick books, pick up all of my stuff, pick up everything we publish, pick up everything we write. Just buy all the books. Go.
Absolutely.
Buy all the books. You got this podcast for free, so buy all the books.
First book is The Driver of Serpents, part of the Blessed and Possessed series, coming out soon from Falstaff Books.
Peace.
Woo! Too sweet, brother.